I'm Lisa Davis. You're listening to It's Your Health, and I'm so glad to have Sarah Fader on the program. Sarah and I met through Twitter. I loved her posts about mental illness and fighting the stigma, her own personal experiences. So I said, Sarah, you've got to come on. And here she is. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Lisa. It's so great to connect with you.
I know. I'm sorry it took me so long. It's really, really great to have you on the show. I really enjoyed your article on HuffPost Healthy Living, fighting against the stigma of mental illness and learning about you were 15 when you had your first panic attack.
So anxiety is a very misunderstood emotion, and anxiety disorders are often quite misunderstood by friends and family who have not experienced extremely high levels of anxiety. And upon reflection, I realized that I had been experiencing panic earlier than 15, probably around 12 is when I started having anxiety, acute anxiety. And that was because I was bullied in junior high school. In the 8th grade, I was afraid to come to school because I was afraid of being bullied by a particular girl. So I remember my heart racing going to school, but then I thought that was supposedly normal because that would be your body's natural reaction when you would feel anxious going to school because there's a threat at school. So that made sense to me.
Oh, sure.
And I didn't think that it was something to be concerned about in terms of a health condition. But when I started to experience panic in high school, it took it to an entirely new level because it was super intense and centered around the fear of growing up, and dying was a big thing for me. I was constantly afraid of death because it became evident to me that one day I would become a grown-up and enter the world and have to take care of myself, and that was terrifying. And then the idea of actually leaving this world was sort of an obsessive thought that I had, and it tortured me. And I can remember my first panic attack because it made such an impact on me. It was like an experience that cannot be duplicated. And the reason that it was so difficult for me during high school was that I didn't know if anyone was experiencing these symptoms as well. So I really had no one to talk to about it except for my mom, because my mom had had panic and I knew that she would understand. So that was a relief. But other than my mom, my peers had no idea what I was experiencing, and I felt a lot of shame and a lot of self-doubt. So that was really difficult. And people, like I mentioned before, people don't understand anxiety because if you haven't experienced a panic attack, you have no idea what that feels like, and it feels like you might die. Like you feel like your heart is pounding, and it might come out of your chest. And you feel like you might faint, you feel dizzy. In my 30s, I started getting even more extreme physiological symptoms with panic, where my whole body would get tingly, and that is a really bizarre sensation, and it's also extremely scary if you don't know why it's happening. So, of course, the people around you don't know what's going on in your body or your mind, and they don't know often how to help. And if you're experiencing these physiological symptoms and you're looking to your friends or family for help and they don't get it, it's really frustrating. And also it can be frustrating for them because they might think that you're exaggerating. So that's the thing. A lot of times with anxiety, people will be judged for being dramatic or exaggerating. And I think that's something that we need to debunk and talk about in the media so that stops happening, that people stop saying, you're being so dramatic, because that's not actually true. You feel, these feelings that you're having when you're anxious are very real,
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and it's so discounting. And that must have been really hard. One of the things I love about your article is you have things that you say, I have heard a lot of unhelpful advice from people who don't understand mental illness. And then you list some of the common things. I'd love to go through those because I think these are so important. The first one is antidepressants are just a Band-Aid covering up the problems. Why don't you stop taking them and try to deal with your anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, people who have legitimate anxiety disorders respond effectively to antidepressants. And if you're under the care of a psychiatrist, then you are being treated for a medical condition. So telling someone to stop taking their medicine when they're under the care of a physician, because psychiatrists are MDs, so they are physicians, does not make any sense. So, you wouldn't give, if you were not a cardiologist, you would not give somebody advice on how to care for their heart. And it's the same thing with mental illness.
You're so right. I know there's such a double standard. It drives me up the wall. All right. You just mentioned another one. You're being dramatic. This is interesting. You're lazy.
Yeah. That happens a lot with depression, because depression is, like anxiety, is very misunderstood. So if you are struggling with depression, sometimes it's difficult to get out of bed, to feel motivated to do the things that need to be done. And people will passive-aggressively tell you that you're lazy. Sometimes it's not actually direct, because, saying to somebody that they're lazy is really, like, in your face, but they might say something like, well, why don't you just, and then fill in the blank,
Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't you just fill out that application for the job? Or why don't you just, and that's actually extremely condescending, because when somebody is having trouble getting up and taking a shower, everything seems overwhelming. So telling them that, or not trying to understand that their mind is actually rebelling against them and it's difficult to function, and then telling them that they're not trying hard enough. It's more, I think lazy is more like saying to somebody, you're just not trying hard enough.
That makes sense. Now, what do you want people to say, and what do you think is going to help people?
I think more than what you can say is what you can do, and what you can do is be a good listener. I think that's part of the problem, is that people often want to give advice to people that have mental illness, and that's not necessarily helpful. You need to meet them where they're at.
Exactly.
So if you need to listen before you start telling them what to do, because that's not going to be helpful if you have no idea what they're experiencing. Try to be empathic. First of all, try to take a moment and listen to their experience, even though you don't know what they have been through, or maybe you've never had a manic episode or had a panic attack. You can still try to be empathetic.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because that's something that I think people really lack, unfortunately, is if they haven't been through it themselves, they haven't known somebody, it's really easy to be like, oh, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're not going to say that to someone with cancer or diabetes.
Exactly. And that's a really big problem in our society, is that these things, these mental health issues are looked at as people being like, people just not trying hard enough. Well, if you just tried a little harder, then you wouldn't have ADHD.
Yeah.
Sure. No, actually, my brain doesn't produce a certain chemical, so that's why I have ADHD.
I put a book together with Trisha Bliven-Chazanoff, who has OCD, and wrote a really powerful essay, Easy to Love but Hard to Live With. And I wish that we had known you, because if we do another one, I would love to have you in it. And I think just having people read stories and sharing can help so much. And whether or not you have an issue or know somebody, just to get out there and educate yourself about these issues can make a big difference. Because you never know when you might have an issue, or someone you love, right? I mean,
yeah. I would love to be involved in the next project for sure. I think that you're wonderful, and what you're doing is it's so important now, especially.
Well, tell us about what you're working on, because you're asking people for videos, correct? And to talk about their stories.
Yeah, that's a great segue, actually. So I started an organization called Stigma Fighters, which you were very generous to donate to. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I know that you get it, which is very nice. So Stigma Fighters is an online community of people who are sharing their stories about living with mental illness. And the reason that I started it was because of my HuffPost article. When I got on the Huffington Post initially, it had nothing to do with mental illness. I was talking about something completely unrelated. And I said, okay, now I've got an audience. I want to talk about something that means something to me. And that's when I wrote about mental illness, because I knew that it was something that people needed to hear. And I wanted to tell my story and just it's almost like, and I was talking to my uncle who happens to be gay. It's almost like coming out of the closet, right? Yeah. So it's like I lived with the secret, right? I had panic disorder for so many years, and I never spoke about it in such a public way. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it, you know? And so I said, I'm just going to tell my story. I'm going to say, and I think what part of the reason that I thought I had the confidence to do it is because I've read so many blogs since I started getting into social media where people openly are talking about being on antidepressants. And I was like, wow, okay, so the dialogue is changing now, and people are more open about these conditions. I feel like now is the time to make this statement. You know?
Oh, I completely agree.
You know what I mean? So I started talking about what I had been through, and I got all this amazing feedback from people who wanted to share their stories about living with mental illness. They were like, "Thank you so much for writing what you wrote. It made me feel less alone. I have bipolar, or I have panic, or this is what I've experienced," and it made me feel wonderful because I felt like I was impacting people. But it also made me feel like there was something that we needed to have online where people could talk about what they had been through. And that's why I created Stigma Fighters, so that people would have a place to tell their story. So it wasn't just me talking, because I've always wanted to help people, and I come from a helping profession. I have been a vocational rehab counselor for many years, and that's why I kind of gravitate toward helping people. And so Stigma Fighters really was that it's my baby. Like, that's what I created. And what I'm doing now with Stigma Fighters is I'm creating chapters of Stigma Fighters in universities and high schools around the country so that students have a place to talk about mental illness.
One of the things, there's so many great things I love on your site. I'm looking at this article this post by James Gummer, and he says, many people think that obsessive compulsive disorder is just that hand washing thing or a need to tidy up your bedroom. It can be, but most of the time it's so much more. OCD is a tricky bastard. And that's something the media always portrays it as, the hand washing. And that is true for some. And that's something that we talk about in Easy to Love but Hard to Live with too, is for Tricia, and it sounds like for you as well with the anxiety, it was the obsessive thoughts that were really difficult. Like you said, you had about dying and about growing up, and hers were about getting pregnant and having HIV. And she was 11 and she never had sex, but she was like, what if I was kidnapped? What if I was, and like, there wasn't this voice saying, but that's totally irrational. It didn't matter. You know what I mean? It was just like, that was the fear. And that's what kept haunting her.
I have the O of OCD, but I don't have the C, like, I don't have compulsions, but I have intrusive and obsessive thoughts. Okay. But the thing that I've learned to deal with them, and they're annoying, but what I've learned techniques through cognitive behavior therapy to deal with them.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, CBT has saved my life, literally. Like, it really was a game changer for me.
People hear a lot about it. What is a session like? How does CBT work? If you can give us some info on that.
CBT is a short-term therapy. Typically, it will last 90 days. And, sometimes you can get a refresher course, but it's supposed to be short-term. And you learn techniques in order to combat cognitive distortions. So there's a list. I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's like 10 cognitive distortions, and they are things along the lines of mind reading. So, for example, I think Lisa hates me because I just think that she does, because I just feel like she hates me. There's no evidence to prove that you hate me, right? But I just think you do. So that's an example of a cognitive distortion. So what you would do in a CBT session is you would evaluate the validity of that thought. On a scale of 1 to 10, how true do you think that is? And then you would then do a worksheet based upon that distortion, and you would see, upon reflection and completing the worksheet, that it's not really true, because you don't have evidence to support the fact that somebody hates you or not, because you can't read their mind. And there's a list of them, and I highly recommend there's a workbook called the Anxiety and Phobia Workbook that is very CBT based, and it's great if you can't afford to go to a CBT therapist because they can be pretty pricey. I think the Anxiety and Phobia Workbook is like $20, but and you can also download CBT worksheets online.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so that's a really great thing to do. And also, if you live in New York, there is a CBT clinic that is through Weill Cornell. That's where I went, and I really liked it. And it's great because they take all insurances, and it's people that are getting their PhDs, so they're really excited to be there. And I had such a wonderful experience. But it was great for me because I went there when I was pregnant, and I couldn't be on medication. So it was really nice to be able to have an effective form of therapy that mimicked what SSRIs do.
That is nice. And, I'm really glad we brought up the antidepressants too earlier. And I think that there's so much negativity, especially in like the natural health world, which I'm in, and I don't agree with it. I mean, I've seen medications work for people. I think it's great, and not everything is going to be cured with, a herbal remedy. I mean, it's just unfortunately, right?
I mean, what really upsets me is the people that are like, "Oh, you have bipolar disorder. You should just eat some more kale." And you're like, no, that's not even really a thing. That doesn't help anyone.
Oh my gosh, has somebody actually said that to you?
I mean, I've heard things. I mean, that's a gross exaggeration, but I mean things like that. Where you're just like, "Are you kidding me? That's no." I just think that that natural remedies are wonderful, and if you can find something that works for you, that's great. But I think that you should not proselytize natural remedies to people if they are doing okay on pharmaceuticals. That's fine. And I don't understand these people that are so vehemently against pharmaceutical medication when it helps people.
I agree.
Black sheep of the natural health world, apparently, because there's a lot of things where I'm like, wait, what? So I've seen it make a huge difference in my child's life and other people that I know. I mean, it's
exactly.
Just huge.
And I mean, so here's an example. I was seeing a Chinese acupuncturist who, like, from China, and he was great. And he was like, some of the healthiest people that I work with are on antidepressants. So it's like whatever works for you. I optimally, I would love to try to be not medicated if that's possible and find a natural remedy, but I'm not going, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, So I feel like if I can find a medication that helps me, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to talk a little bit about old school, new school mom, integrating the old and new to help raise a well-rounded child. Tell us about that. It's really cool.
Yeah, so I started my blog when my son was almost a year, and I just started it on a whim. I was talking with my best friend on the phone, and we were like thinking about what kind of a name I could use, And I'm a child of the 80s, so I'm into like 80s nostalgia. And I like things that are quote unquote old school, I still have a VCR. I love, Inspector Gadget, things that are like typically 80s childhood stuff.
Sure.
So to me, that's like my old school. But then I also think that there are things that are valuable in, current modern day society that we can use with, like I think iPads are great. You can really learn a lot. Kids can really learn a lot from apps and things like that. But I don't think that we should be completely technologically obsessed. I think that it needs to be a balance. And it's funny too, right? So, old school, new school, it's like the two different parts of my personality. And I'm really into astrology too. So I think it's about balance, and I'm a Libra, so that makes sense too.
Yeah. See, I was a kid in the 70s, so I completely understand. I'm very old school on some things. Like, I love a summer day. I call it the 1970s, just hang around day, put on the sprinklers, play outside, run around, just like no technology, no cell phones, just, hanging out, having fun like we used to.
Yeah, I always say to my kids, we have a DVR, we have DirecTV, so I'm like, when I grew up, you couldn't record anything. You just had to wait until it came on again as a rerun.
That's right. And you can't pause. My daughter constantly, she gets up to go to the bathroom. She's like, Mommy, pause the TV. And I'm thinking, geez, when I was a kid, you wait till the commercial or you just go really fast.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you got to time your bathroom breaks, Just go during the commercial because you don't want to miss it.
Totally. But I'm definitely more new school when it comes to like respecting your kids and giving them choices. And it's not just like be seen and not heard and, all that stuff. I'm not into that.
Yeah, I don't like that either. But I really do believe in kids having, what's the word? Boundaries, I guess it is.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I think that a lot of times, okay, so one thing I don't like to do is criticize other people's parenting because I'm not in their home, and I'm not raising their kids. So that people are going to do what they're going to do unless they're like beating them. Like that's but I don't like to tell people how to parent their kids. But for me, I feel like I don't want to be my kid's friend. I'm their parent, and I want them to respect me. And I want them to see me as an authoritative figure. So I'm going to be friendly and we're going to have fun, but they need to listen to me.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
So that's kind of the old school in me.
Sure.
But, that's not to say that I don't give them choices or don't, but for example, whatever is for dinner is for dinner. I'm not a restaurant and we're not going to go down a menu and you don't get to pick. If I'm feeling like I'm clenching my teeth or I'm getting really anxious, I need to walk away. And I constantly have to remind myself of that, We all get frustrated as parents, and especially having an anxiety disorder, it's like 3,000 times worse, right? Because I already run on the anxious side, So, you just have to remind yourself that, and I do that. I have to remind myself that it is okay to walk away and go to the bathroom and cry.
Yeah.
Because sometimes that's all you can do, or cry in the shower. And it is okay for your kids to see you cry sometimes because that means that you're human.
Exactly. Oh, I agree.
You don't want to be a robot. You shouldn't be like losing it all the time, but it is okay for your kids to see that you are a human being.
Yeah, I think that, I love everything that you're doing, Sarah. Give us all the ways to find you and how people can donate and learn more about Stigma Fighters too.
So for Stigma Fighters, you can visit us at stigmafighters.com. And there is a link to donate right there. So just go to stigmafighters.com and you can donate. The company that I'm using to donate, like it's a crowdfunding service called Fundreamer, and it's really awesome. They actually reached out to me, so I'm really excited to use them. They are a woman-run company, super feminist. I really love them, and we've actually raised $1,500 so far, and the goal is $5,000. So we're doing really well. But in order to make this college campus tour happen, we really need donations. So even $1 helps. Even if you want to just what does a coffee cost you $1, right? So give it to Stigma Fighters. You don't need a third cup of coffee. Come on.
Yeah.
So stigmafighters.com, and then you can also read my column on Psychology Today. It's called Panic Life. And I talk about all kinds of stuff on there related to anxiety and mental health and things like that. And then my personal blog is oldschoolnewschoolmom.com. So check me out there. And then if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at OSNSMom.
Cool. Sarah, thank you so much, and keep up all the awesome work.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It was really a pleasure. I think what you're doing is wonderful, too, and I can't wait to collaborate with you.